Okay, in this video we're just going to do a bit of a recap of the difference between real and nominal GDP and the difference between gross national expenditure and gross domestic product. So whenever we're measuring GDP, we're measuring the quantity of all goods and services times the price. So the total value of goods and services produced in an economy, and to calculate that it's basically just the quantity of what we produce times by the price. When measuring increases in economic activity though, we want to remove the effects of inflation. Because basically, if we're only producing more because prices are going up, it's not really telling us that we're becoming richer, because essentially everyone's purchasing power is going to have fallen. So we want to actually see if we're producing more goods and services, and to do that we need to remove the impacts of inflation, because that'll tell us whether we're actually producing more, and that'll tell us whether our economy is actually growing and we're getting richer. So real GDP, or what we call chain volume GDP, is an increase in economic growth after removing the effects of inflation. And basically what we do is we use constant prices, or we can use last year's prices, which is the chain volume GDP approach. So we use prices from the previous period and times them by quantities in the current period to give us a better indication of whether we've actually experienced growth. Nominal GDP is basically GDP before we've adjusted for inflation. It's just basically current prices times volume of production in the current year. So to work out, whenever we're working out growth, basically what you do is you do GDP in the second year minus the first year divided by the first year. Okay, so that's basically the formula that we're going to use. So here's an example that we did in class. To work out nominal GDP in year 1, it's just that times that, plus that times that, plus that times that, which would give you 1,000. To work out GDP in year 2, it's just 10 times 55, plus 12 times 25, plus 9 times 30. So that's how you work out GDP in year 1 and nominal GDP in year 2. If we want to work out real GDP in year 2, we use the prices in year 1 and the output in year 2. So we're really just timesing these two red figures to get our real GDP in year 2. Okay, so what would end up happening is you would get your GDP in year 1 would be 1,000, your nominal GDP in year 2 would be 1,120, and your real GDP in year 2 is only 1,025, once we use these prices instead of these prices. Okay, and then to work out our change in nominal GDP, it's just 120, which is 1,120 minus 1,000 divided by 1,000. And to work out a change in real GDP, it's just 1,025 minus 1,000 divided by 1,000, which will give you 2.5%. So as you can see, nominal GDP is significantly higher than real GDP, which will always be the case if an economy is experiencing inflation. If an economy is experiencing deflation, or decreasing prices, then this figure here would be higher than this figure here. Okay? But generally, nominal GDP is higher. In Australia, nominal GDP is around 3.7% I think at the moment, and real GDP is about 2.5%. And the difference is basically the level of inflation. If growth in real GDP is above 0, it means the economy has experienced economic growth in real terms. After we remove inflation, the economy is producing more than it did last year. The value of what we're producing is more than what it was last year using constant prices. Really careful with your language. Doesn't mean we're just producing more goods and services, because we might be producing more packets of M&Ms but less cars. But the actual value of what we're producing, if we keep the prices the same, is now higher than what it was last year. And therefore our living standards are improving, assuming that it's growing at a faster rate than our population is growing. That's the important thing. So we want if real growth is say 3% and population growth was 3%, then we wouldn't be experiencing any improvement in GDP per capita. But if population growth was only 2%, then we would be experiencing some growth in GDP per capita. Okay, so some tricks. If inflation is greater than growth in nominal GDP, real GDP is falling, because inflation is growing faster than nominal GDP. If inflation is equal to the growth in nominal GDP, real GDP stays the same, so if they were both 3%. And if inflation is less than nominal GDP, okay, real GDP will be rising. And that's what we have in Australia at the moment, and that's what we want. We want nominal GDP to be growing faster than inflation, because that means we're producing more. A couple of other quick terms that we discussed in class. Gross national expenditure is the total expenditure by Australians on goods and services produced in Australia and the rest of the world. So basically it's just all spending by Australians on any products. GDP is all production by Australians in Australia. So one measures the total expenditure by Australians, one measures total production by Australians. So essentially the difference is GDP excludes exports, includes exports because it's produced by Australia, but doesn't include imports because they're not produced by Australia, even though we're the ones that are purchasing them. And G&E includes imports because we're spending it, Australians are spending it, but excludes exports because it's not Australians spending that money. Okay, so if G&E is greater than GDP, it means there is less production than compared to expenditure, and generally this will be synonymous with increasing debt. So if G&E is higher than GDP, our debt's likely to be growing. And the difference between our exports and imports. G&E greater than GDP, imports greater than exports. Causes a higher trade deficit and eventually more debt. D for debt. If GDP is greater than G&E, it means exports are greater than imports, and our international debt is likely to be falling. And this was the case during our mining boom. And again, we're not talking about the prices, we're talking about the value, the total value of exports and the total value of imports, which is always price times quantity. So we're saying we're exporting $1 million worth of things and importing $900,000 worth of things, we have a $100,000 surplus. And the last thing is gross national income. So just remember, gross domestic product is basically all the market value of all goods and services produced in our borders. So if it's produced within Australia, whether it's an Australian or international company, it's our GDP. Gross national income is the same, but it takes away any income earned by foreign companies working within Australia, and any rent earned by foreigners in Australia, or dividends or interest on their shares and on the bank accounts. But it also includes incomes earned by Australians that are living overseas. So if I set up a business overseas, that would be included within our gross national income, but not our gross domestic product. Okay, if there's someone from Japan comes over and works in Australia, that would be included in our GDP, but not our GNI. Okay, because they're not an Australian citizen. And that's it for that video.